Among other things, they were expected to keep peace and order throughout the land, using force if necessary, fight foreign invaders and anyone who would threaten the existence of Christianity, prevent nobles from infighting, and block any ambitious ones from stealing power, marry well, provide a legitimate heir, and at all times remain strong, capable, and pious. Being a successful ruler in the Middle Ages was a serious business and meant spinning a lot of plates. So just what makes a great medieval king? Let's look at some of the era's European monarchs and see if we can sort out what made them a hit or in some cases a complete miss. Tracking historical events is easy in comparison to tracking your wallet or card clip. Even if you have a designated bowl by the front door specifically designed to keep your keys and wallet in, I can guarantee that you've misplaced your wallet more than once. Well, that's a thing of the medieval past with today's sponsor, Exeter. Exeter invented the first trackable wallet and now wants to help you upgrade all your daily essentials sustainably. Exeter kindly sent us the Parliament wallet, not the one of Fowls, as this wallet has everything you'd want and more. Made from environmentally certified premium Italian leather, it holds up to 12 cards and cash, while staying super slim so it doesn't make an unsightly bulge in your trousers. Boasting built-in RFID blocking to protect you from data theft and wireless skimming, Exeter products make the perfect Christmas gift, and the Parliament wallet comes in 6 colours, meaning you can get it for all the family. Exeter's range includes wallets, backpacks, and key cases, as well as add-ons like 7-in-1 tool cards and laptop power banks. They're also having a big sale, and using our code you'll get up to 55% off the original price, and you'll get a free gift if you spend over $90. So use our code Medieval Madness to get up to 55% off Exeter's wallets, or click the link in the description to get your Christmas gifts sorted now. And now for today's episode. Welcome to Medieval Madness. Defend the faith. It was Edward the Confessor who commissioned the construction of Westminster Abbey in London, where 39 English and later British monarchs have been crowned. Edward was canonised by Pope Alexander in 1161, about a century after his death. But it was William the Conqueror who, after winning the Battle of Hastings, was the first king to be crowned there on Christmas Day in 1066. At a coronation, the monarch was anointed with holy oil, which the medievals believed gave a direct link to God. However, William's coronation didn't go off without a hitch. The lords and earls that were gathered in the abbey shouted their consent so loudly that the Norman knights outside thought that there was a rebellion and set fire to all the houses around the cathedral. The Catholic Church controlled every aspect of life during the Middle Ages, and the sanctity of a monarch was taken very seriously. In return, medieval kings were expected to protect the Catholic Church. This meant that European leaders should heed any advice from the clergy and respect the Pope. Sounds easy enough, although it was more than King John could manage at the beginning of the 13th century. He had an argument with Pope Innocent III over who should become the new Archbishop of Canterbury. John ignored the Pope's choice and appointed his own candidate. But the Pope was having none of it and ordered the king to be excommunicated in 1209. This meant that no one in England was able to be baptized, married, or buried under a Catholic service for a year until the king paid a substantial fine. Some took their zeal for religion to the extreme, like Richard I, the Lionheart, who devoted so much time off fighting on crusade in the Holy Land that he spent little time ruling at home in England. Richard believed in the divine right of kings and considered himself born in a rank which recognizes no superior but God, meaning he could not be held accountable by his people, his parliament, or even by the Pope. In fact, between defending his lands in France and being a Christian commander in the Third Crusade against his Muslim counterparts, he is likely to have been in England no more than 6 months during a 10-year reign. This devotion to his religion may have made him a pious hero in the eyes of the church, but not a great ruler when it came to the everyday running of a country. His absenteeism has caused him to be described as a bad king by more than one historian. In the 13th century, King Henry III was known for his piety. He was very devoted to the figure of Edward the Confessor and adopted him as his patron saint, fasting before his feast day. Henry held extravagant church services and went to mass every day. He donated generously to charities, helping orphans and feeding paupers. Marry well and multiply. For a royal in the Middle Ages, marrying well really mattered. A good marriage could make or break a kingdom and was necessary to produce a legitimate heir. Males were the preferred kind and add more riches, power, and land to a dynasty. Henry II did well when he married one of the most powerful women in Western Europe during the High Middle Ages, as she was a former Queen Consort of France and Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right. Henry had 8 legitimate children with Eleanor, 3 of his sons became kings of England, Henry the Young King, Richard I and John, and 2 daughters became queens of Castile and Sicily. Even his illegitimate children did okay out of his reign, with one being named an earl and another the Archbishop of York. Henry and Eleanor had lands stretching from the Scottish borders to the French Pyrenees. When the Yorkist King Edward IV married Elizabeth Woodville in 1464, it proved to be a mistake that would plunge England back into civil war. The widowed Elizabeth was not only a commoner, but also a mother and a Lancastrian, described by the Privy Council as, quote, "no wife for a prince such as himself, for she was not the daughter of a duke or earl." It was a controversial choice that lost Edward a useful match with a French princess, and more importantly the support of Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, who was known as the Kingmaker, because he was influential in the overthrow of 2 kings. Because of this marriage, Warwick transferred his loyalty to the former King Henry VI, who was in exile and raised a revolt against his Edward. Edward II also made a bad marriage with Isabella of France, the daughter of the French King Philip IV. Edward was more concerned with his court favourites, including Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despencer. Becoming known as the She-Wolf of France, a disgruntled Isabella set out to overthrow her husband and become regent on behalf of their son, Edward III. It's thought that she may have even helped to arrange her husband's murder. Carrying on the royal line is a golden rule when being a monarch. Let's face it, you can never have too many legitimate children when you are king. It's all about ensuring that your bloodline continues, and with a high mortality rate in the Middle Ages, a royal house's future depended on having a large family. Edward I managed to be successful in this respect, having at least 14 children with his poor first wife, Eleanor of Castile, possibly even 16, and another 3 with his second wife. One of his sons became Edward II. His other children did quite well too, being presented with titles like Duchess, Count, and Duke. There were even a couple of queens among them. At the end of the 14th century, Edward III's large brood of 12 included the 2 prominent princes, Edward the Black Prince and John of Gaunt. But of the 20 children that Henry I fathered, only 2 were legitimate, one being William the Duke of Normandy and the other a daughter named Matilda. When William died at just 17 in 1120, it was the Empress Matilda whom Edward named as his heir. This led to a 19-year civil war known as the Anarchy, when Edward's nephew Stephen vied with Matilda for the throne. Despite Edward having many sons, their illegitimacy led to England being thrown into chaos after his death. Learn the art of delegation. Even the greatest and most powerful monarch would be naive to think that he can rule alone, and this is where a group of trustworthy delegates comes in handy. The most successful reigns were usually a collaborative enterprise between the king and the government. Henry II relied on a magnum concilium, or a great council, for information, advice and decision-making, as well as Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, for counsel. His grandson, Henry III, abandoned the idea of filling his royal government with several great offices of state, and instead surrounded himself with a small council. The warrior king Henry V, who was celebrated for his famous victory at the Battle of Agincourt, relied on his uncle Cardinal Beaufort for advice. It has been argued that Henry was encouraged by his religious statesmen to first go to war with France in the early 15th century. In the 12th century, when King Philip II of France passed a law that pronounced anyone found to be gambling and swearing should be drowned, it was under the guidance of the clergy and his barons. The Holy Roman Emperor Conrad II was a hugely successful monarch who ruled the 3 kingdoms of Germany, Burgundy, and Italy during the High Middle Ages. He achieved this by not only delegating decision-making to his nobles, but also by taking advice from his queen consort, Gisela of Swabia. Conrad also displayed another kingly quality by protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. It was the poor, the peasants, widows, and orphans of the land that were unlikely to receive a fair hearing for their grievances. Conrad interrupted his coronation parade to hear their pleas and paused the following feast to make sure that the protests made by a lowly serf were heard. Dress and act the part. Kings and queens are supposed to look different from their subjects. It was why Edward III brought in a sumptuary law during the 14th century to stop any old commoner from wearing fur. His great-great-grandson, Edward IV, went further and brought in the Acts of Apparel, which restricted the wearing of certain expensive fabrics like velvet and satin, and the wearing of any clothing dyed dark red, royal blue, or crimson. Monarchs were supposed to look and dress differently to their subjects, and Edward brought in the latest Burgundian fashions to his court to make sure that this was the case. However, Henry VI, although he did dress as befitted a king during his early reign, never really looked the part or conveyed a sense of majesty towards the end. Instead, he was remembered by the people as a, quote, sad and pitiful figure who was paraded through the streets of London in a shabby blue gown. Not only should a monarch physically look good, but they should also be seen to look good. Public image was a great tool for any wannabe ruler. Let's face it, you never know when some other power-seeking sovereign would want to invade or when some ambitious nobleman would instigate an uprising. Then you would need the backing of the people and probably need to raise an army. So your subjects needed to be aware of just how chivalrous, strong, and magnificent you were at all times. Edward III managed this with great style by holding huge lavish feasts and balls where along with his friends he would dress up in elaborate costumes. He was described by the Welsh historian Mark Ormerod as a natural showman. But it was Edward's great-grandson Henry V that was the master of spin. Being a great warrior helped, but Henry knew the importance of manipulating his self-image. Sometime after the Battle of Agincourt and before 1418, a Latin chronicle was written. Called The Life and Deeds of Henry V, it tells the tale of a pious king on a divine mission from God to return France to its rightful ruler. A successful public image that Henry cultivated and one that has survived the test of time. Although he died prematurely, Henry left a male heir and a trail of victorious battles in his wake. Richard III, however, left behind a legacy of a hunchbacked conniver and murderer of 2 innocent young boys, despite his attempt to represent his 1483 throne grab as moral and just. An image that no amount of modern defenders can completely erase. Having strength and skill in both military and political life, a successful medieval king needed to rule over his kingdom efficiently, sometimes more than one kingdom at a time, whilst keeping the peace, maintaining order, pleasing the church and nobles, and having the love and respect of his subjects. Once his reign was over, he needed to leave a lasting legacy that would be passed down for the generations yet to come. Thank you for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying these videos, and I'll see you next week for another one. Have a great week. Cheers.